That's on. Fantastic. Simon Sweetman.
G'day.
How are you?
Yeah, good.
Welcome to the podcast.
It's good to be here.
Now, we were just talking about funding and your podcast, which is kind of what I wanted to start the whole conversation off with.
Can I hit that?
Yeah. Just push it down. And this is the coffee for those who are listening. I actually won that. It's funny. I won it from a... Fringe, New Zealand Fringe Festival, which I have a show coming up in on the 24th, 25th, and 26th.
Man, that's an expert plug.
Yeah, that was great, eh?
Yeah. You didn't actually win that. You just needed to slide that plug in.
I just want to find, it doesn't matter, but you've got a podcast, and you've been going for ages.
I have, with a very imaginatively titled podcast. Yeah, just used my own name. There was like a lot of things, that was a placeholder.
Yeah.
And it was like, I'll just call it Sweetman Podcast and then work out what we're going to do with it. And it's just stayed that way. And I have thought about renaming it, but I think now it's been 5 years, so and 240 episodes. So renaming it, seems a bit silly as well. So that's what it is. Yeah.
What's your thoughts on having a name in the podcast? Because I always wonder, if I ever wanted to exit it.
Yeah.
It's like,
So I did it I actually did it apart from the placeholder thing. I did do it for a specific reason. My name was basically Mud because I'd been writing often quite savage reviews of bands. I'd written loads of really positive things, but somehow those get lost on the internet and people don't remember those. They just remember the nasty ones. So I felt like my name was Mud, and I thought the whole idea for me of the podcast was I'm going to invite people into my house and hopefully prove that I'm not an asshole. Mm-hmm. And I think a friend suggested to me, well, why don't you actually just call it the Sweetman Podcast or Sweetman Podcast, and then your name is front and center? Because I was known, when I say known, I'm realistic about what that means. I don't mean there were millions of people.
You were hated.
Yeah, but I was known and hated for a blog I was doing on stuff, and that was called Blog on the Tracks. And I wanted to, and I've got a website called Off the Tracks because I was balancing the two, and I'm very happy with Off the Tracks as a website, but I didn't want to have the tracks thing in the title of the podcast. So I just thought I'd put my name in it. So what are my thoughts on it? I'm stuck with it.
Yeah.
I think it's okay. I think, some people have their names in their podcasts and some people don't.
When I was applying for funding, it's weird because you write about yourself in the third person with the name of your own podcast as well. It's like, the host, Gavin, will use XYZ production process.
Yeah.
So these blogs that you were writing, are these all New Zealand bands that you're reviewing?
Oh, no, it was all sorts, man. I did it from, 2007 until about 2016.
Was it a paid gig?
It was eventually a paid gig. Like a lot of things that started off, it was free. I was a freelance music writer. I wrote for the newspaper back when they had people doing that in a freelance capacity. So I started writing reviews for the newspaper in about 2002. And I'd got a bit of a reputation for being, quote unquote, a savage reviewer, an honest reviewer. So I was quite happy so I was reviewing international gigs and a bit of comedy as well, but mostly music. And, I was quite happy to say if I thought something was shit. Yeah. And that's my opinion, and that's what a reviewer does. Uh-huh. And it's balanced, hopefully, with some background knowledge of the subject. And
that's what I was going to say.
Runs on the board, having, absorbed a lot of related culture, sure. But I was quite happy to... it wasn't as savage as things get now, because this was sort of pre-internet explosion and this was old-fashioned print newspaper writing. So, I wasn't using, horrible, language and I'm not about that. I'm about sort of saying what I think of something. And so that morphed into online writing, and the blogs came up through stuff, and they were looking for people to do... a film blog and a makeup blog and a pets blog and things like that, and it was like a no-brainer to me. Well, I could be the guy that does the music blog, and I wrote to them, and they wrote back and said, actually, you're on our list, we were about to contact you. And so I started doing it, and I just took to it and enjoyed it. It was just a daily missive. I could write whatever I wanted, so I could review my own record collection, I could write reviews of gigs, I could champion things I thought no one had heard of. I could be a total geek and go, Phil Collins is actually underrated. People who are mean to him are wrong, and here's why, and do that kind of style think piece. I could just write whatever I wanted. So it was great. The whole thing it was just about music, and I wanted to do it. I realised if I didn't do it every day, I'd stop doing it. So I think they only wanted it 2 or 3 times a week, but I did it 5 times a week.
Yeah.
And because a daily deadline's better than a weekly deadline or a casual thing, because then it just becomes, it's the writing muscle, you're flexing it, and it's just happening. So I did it, and then I think I wrote 400 of them before there was any conversation of money.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I did it for a long time before, and then I basically said to them, well, what happened was I wrote this, what I thought was a really cool piece. I interviewed this musician, Phil Judd, famous New Zealand musician from the 70s and 80s. He basically was the guy who created the band Split Enz, and he'd been a bit of a recluse, and I'd spent years trying to get him to do an interview because he lives in Melbourne and he didn't want to talk to anyone. And I got this interview, and I did a really great interview with him, and I wrote it up for the blog, and it was the 400th piece, and I was really happy with it. And then Stuff put it on the front page with a big tabloid heading about how he'd fallen out with a bandmate, and it was really cheesy, and I was really angry about it. And I thought, well, if they're going to exploit my writing like that, the least they could do is pay me, because I'm doing this for nothing, for my own sweat, and they're kind of making me look like I'm the hack guy that wants to stir shit up when I don't. So it's funny, you can compromise your morals pretty quickly if there's a paycheck. So I said, well, at least pay me. And they were like, oh, well, yeah, you need to lead that conversation. Yeah, we'll give you some money. So then it became a paid gig. I think I wrote 1,700 or 1,800 of them all up.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
So that's huge.
Yeah, it's nuts.
But it's all mainly restricted to the arts, comedy, and music.
Yeah, it was all arts. I mean, it was called Blog on the Track, so the blog itself was really music focused, but I could occasionally write about an author or a comedian or someone, particularly if there was a music angle, a filmmaker.
Sure.
I could deviate a little bit because those things are all related, but it was always about finding the music angle.
How did you develop this relationship with music?
Yeah.
With music, specifically.
Yeah, music was the thing, and it always was. And I think I was probably 6 or 7 years old when I can remember developing the start of my own taste. And I guess music was in the house. And I've got an older brother, he was into music, my parents were into music, but I pretty quickly became obsessive about it. So I was 8 years old and 9 years old reading record covers and wanting to find out which musicians were on, and going through my parents' collection and finding like, oh, well, that bass player's on that record. Oh, let's see if I can find him on another. Even though I couldn't necessarily identify the sound he was making, I became interested in the name. And so you'd research the session players. And so it was very nerdy stuff, writing lists, writing out lyrics, coating the walls of my bedroom with handwritten lyrics from, Pink Floyd songs, David Bowie songs, whatever, Beatles, and then getting into stuff that was more, I guess, contemporary for my age growing up.
Right.
When hip hop exploded, I got massively into the very commercial rap music of the late 80s and early 90s, yeah. And then it just kind of stuck. I mean, I played music a bit. I still play a little bit. I'm a drummer. I kept that quiet for a few years because when you're writing savage reviews, it's best to not
tell people that you actually know how to
not be
play.
like, oh, by the way, come and check out my band.
Yeah.
I mean, I made a living playing in a covers band for years, which is not a cool thing to do, but again, it was a paycheck. It was a necessary thing. I enjoyed it. And then, so it's just always been the thing. And I guess alongside with that, writing has been the thing, got into poetry when I was reading poetry when I was, I don't know, I mean, obviously some things when I was a kid, but certainly 12, 13, reading poetry, writing poetry at 13, haven't stopped. Been writing poetry and thoughts, stories, non-stop really since then. And then that morphed into, dovetailed with journalism and, writing and music. Those have been the things.
And how important has that, like, it sounds almost like an obsessive relationship with music. Is that essential? It sounds like it was. And is that essential in what do you think that brings to the table when it comes to reviewing other?
Well, it's funny. It used to bring a lot, and I guess it still does. But the internet is a good way of people catching up. So when I was, I'm being very careful to not say, I OG that was around before the internet.
You can say that.
And, well, I mean, I was around before the internet, but
this is that tall poppy syndrome coming in, man. You got to own it.
I mean, of course I was around before the internet, and I think I've done an okay job of adapting to the online world. But
absolutely, from what I've seen, which I want to talk to you about.
Yeah. But I'm no digital native, so I still don't know all the shortcut keys.
Sure.
And I still have my weird ways of doing things, and someone, not necessarily younger, sometimes someone older than me will go, right. Oh, you realize you can do that? And I'm like, oh, cool, that's helpful.
That just shaved a year off my life.
And yet I'm on a computer all day, every day. So I'm no master of the computer, but I can type fast and I'm interested in things and I look things up. But before that, I was doing the old world version of that. I was reading books. I was going to the library. I was, as I say, a record wasn't just a thing to put on and listen to. You devoured every side of the cover. You looked for the hidden information. If a record didn't have any liner notes telling you about it, it at least had who wrote the songs, and I would write that down and look for those songwriters somewhere else. As I say, to begin with, just in my parents' 100 records or whatever they had.
Do you think there's a lost sense of meaning that music has going completely digital now?
Yeah, there is for a lot of people.
Compared to just purely physical?
Yeah, there is for a lot of people.
Records?
I mean, and I understand that. I've been pretty a long time ago I sort of realized it didn't really matter how you were listening to music as long as you were, it doesn't matter what the format is. So I had this enormous CD collection, and that was my currency. It was weird. I mean, I worked in record shops.
CDs, man.
I had about 6,000 CDs at one point, and now I have about 20, I think.
It's crazy, right? Yeah. The compression of space.
Yeah. And I traded a lot of my CDs in for credit to buy records, and I guess wanting to move into being a tiny bit of a purist. And I always had a record collection, but I got very interested in building that record collection, having a classic collection of things. So I had thousands and thousands of records, and now I've got that down to a much more manageable, I don't know, maybe 1,500 records or something like that. And I'll probably look to drop that down further for a variety of reasons. Space is always the final frontier, money, and the fact that, man, I just listen to Spotify and YouTube. That's how I find music now. Mm-hmm. And I don't have any moral dilemma around that, because I was getting free music when music had a cost. So I'm used to being the bad guy. Sure. And so, yes, it sucks if artists aren't getting paid, but at the same time, that's not my problem. And I've done a lot of unpaid work, and I've done a lot of promotional work for artists that has maybe gone unthanked or unnoticed or whatever. So we're all getting fucked over one way or another.
I don't think the responsibility lies with the listener. I really don't. I think the responsibility lies with these companies that are going out and just fucking the artists every single way that they get to. And you know what I mean?
Totally. And look, that's always been happening.
But they blame us. That's the thing. It's like,
you're a responsible listener.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, well, we're going to pay them 2 cents a listen. Not even that. 2 cents a listen would be insane. They don't even pay you that. Yeah. I think what I was listening to recently is there was an executive on the Spotify board, and he was talking about how now it's more important for you to release one of my friends was telling me this, release a consistent stream of media more so than ever. Back in the day, it used to be release an album, go dark for 4 or 5 years.
Longer. Yeah.
Exactly. But now
book a tour, one tour.
And you're good. But now it's totally different.
It's relentless. And look, I mean, even I find that, I'm spamming the world about what I'm doing, and it's this finite audience.
And you only get a little blip, and then it goes.
That's it. And it's this finite audience that is actually happy with what they were getting outside of the noise. Yeah. But if I don't do the noise, I don't look like I'm doing the work, and the little wee ripples from those waves of noise do pull someone in eventually, and it's awful. I feel caught in that trap,
a cycle where you have to consistently
I totally
release.
feel like that, but it's a trap of my own doing.
Yes.
And what's the alternative? Not do it. And at the moment, that doesn't feel like something I...
Are you talking about your podcast right now?
Yeah, everything. Podcast, the blog. I mean, the podcast, I'm in the middle of the biggest break I've ever had from it.
Explain. What do you? Can you explain?
Yeah, I just took a break. I just took a summer break.
Oh, for some reason I thought you meant like the break. Like I made it, boys.
Oh, nah, man, shit. Yeah.
I was like, congratulations,
Yeah,
that's
thanks.
sick.
I got a limo down here.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, no, sorry. I obviously took a forced break during the lockdown. I made and we've met one other time before this, and we had a chat, and I was saying to you that I made the decision I'm actually not going to deal with Zoom calls and stuff like that. When people are worried about what the fuck's happening, I don't want to be an email in their inbox going, can we still just have a chat? Okay. Even though a lot of artists love having a chat about what they're doing, and a lot of people wanted to process the lockdown measures through chatting with people, I just didn't want to be one more person in that. And my main responsibility during that time was childcare, so took a few weeks off for that, got back to it, realised actually that was good to not have that to think about, and then I've just taken shall I use the word hiatus? I've just taken holiday for the summer period, and I'm actually really enjoying it. I mean, I've recorded a couple of conversations with people when I've been up in Auckland. It's always good to grab someone for later on, so I recorded a conversation in Hawke's Bay and one in Auckland, and we're doing this now. And I'll never turn down the opportunity to talk to someone, but I'm just not putting them out, because I put them out every week. And again, it's that thing. I started off putting the podcast out every fortnight, and then when I wasn't ready to get one out, a week slipped by, and then 2 weeks slipped by, and then I think it was 5 weeks in between putting them out. And then I thought, this is a mess. I'm just going to create the rod for my back. I work better like that. If I publish every week, then one way or another, when the week comes around, if someone drops out and I don't have a podcast, I'll work out a way to fill that spot, and I have. Yeah. And that's that's just how I work. I am a good deadline chaser, like freelance writing taught me that when I was filing reviews for the newspaper, you might have 10 minutes to write about the gig. Back in the days when they would publish the next day and the review would actually be a thing people were looking for, when the Rolling Stones would play the stadium here. None of that stuff's happening anymore. But it was exciting. You get a taxi home, and you leave during the encore, and you're processing your thoughts, and you run in, and you've got 10 minutes and it's going to happen. You're going to do it, short of a technological meltdown, it's going to happen. And, I went to the Big Day Out one year, and there was a technological meltdown, and Neil Young was the headliner, and that's why the newspaper wanted a review of Neil Young. And I had to do an old-fashioned, felt like a sports reporter from the 80s. I had to ring up and dictate my review down the line for someone to sit and type up, and that was exciting, and we were chasing a deadline, and that stuff's fun. So I do come from that world in as much as I can, and I'm amazed by what people put out now in this day and age. People just stay up all night and put things out for no money, and you go to websites and you listen to podcasts, and the content is incredible, and you step back for a minute and you go, how is all this happening? And the reason it's happening is people want to connect. Yeah, that's the reason. That's the simple reason. People want to connect. People want a reason to, frankly, not put a bullet in their brain or anyone else's.
I think it's that thing. That's very, very good point. I think people need a motive. Yeah, and I think people create them themselves. Well, I mean, we all do to a certain degree, but I feel like creating like a podcast or pursuing like an art form is both a love of the art, but also it helps you. It does give you a sense of like meaning and significance, because you're like, oh shit, okay, listen, I'm working on this song. I got to complete this song. It's like, it's a project. It's something to work towards, which is huge.
I think the other thing for me that is worth mentioning is, I did my time doing 10-minute phone conversations too. So the 10-minute phoner is a real skill. But it's
10-minute phoner, what is that?
10-minute phone interview with a famous person. Yeah. You've got 10 minutes, and they've got a new album out, and they're going on tour, and you've got 10 minutes to talk to them. And you've got to squeeze in all the questions they've already heard, but make them sound like they haven't. Of course, yeah. And you've got to turn around. And, the best example for me was I get a phone call at 12 o'clock one day. Can you do an interview with John Paul Jones? He is the bass player at that time in a band called Them Crooked Vultures with, Dave Grohl from Foo Fighters and stuff. But he's the bass player from Led Zeppelin. So it's like,
whoa.
when I'm 14.
Did you fan out?
Yeah, so when I'm 14, Led Zeppelin's like, my favourite band. So of course I want to talk to someone who's in Led Zeppelin, but of course I'm nervous as fuck.
Yeah,
and then I go, okay, when's this interview? Thinking it's going to be next week or in 2 days' time. And he says, look, the thing is, it's in 45 minutes, and I'm really sorry it just came up, but we know you can do it. And I was like, yeah, okay, yeah, cool. I'm actually at work, but I can do it on my lunch break. So I'm like, cool, I can do this. And so I go and book a meeting room, take my lunch break, sit down, and I'm on the phone with John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin, because that's what matters to me. Sure, he's in this other band, and sure, he's done other things, but he was in Led Zeppelin.
Were you just talking about Led Zeppelin
Well,
stuff?
no, I mean, I've got to plug his tour and his album and talk about what he's into, but of course I've got...
Enough about the tour, man. I want to talk about...
of course I've got to get to, but what do you ask him about, what was it like being in Led Zeppelin? How do you frame that?
Well, that's a question I want to ask you two things about, just the function of your podcast. How do you frame your questions when you're, talking to a guest? Because I've been trying to learn how to become... just better at my questions and more intriguing, but also ways to inspire conversations between two people.
Well, you're doing a good job. I mean, not just today, but I've listened to your podcast and I think you do a good job. But it is a learning thing.
Yeah.
And I think some days I think, shit, I'm really good at this. Well, I don't quite think it like that, but I listen back to it and I go, that was good work. And other days I go, thank fuck that guest was excellent. I didn't bring my A game. And so it is this ballet, it is this dance between the two, and you're learning each time, and everything that can happen will happen. So you can go in super prepared going, I'm going to nail this, and for some reason the energy's just not there. Might be you, might be the guest. Other times you can be like, fuck, I'm not feeling this. I hope this goes well. And you walk out just elated going, that was an awesome conversation. I cannot believe...
It feels like butter.
And I cannot believe I was the person who set that up and hit record and got it. I got that conversation. And that person might be really skilled at doing that, but they won't ever do it the same way as we just interacted and did that. So for me, it's been about, I'm a good talker, I'm a good listener, I'm a good researcher, I'm genuinely interested in the people. I mean, I'm choosing the people I want to talk to. So I'm interested in them, or I've decided to be interested in them. Someone's pointed them out to me and I've decided, yes, I want to work out who this person is and why I want to talk to them. And lots of time at the wheel, listening to other podcasts, listening to other styles. People who you don't necessarily gel with can be excellent interviewers. I don't imagine Alec Baldwin is a nice person. I don't imagine that he is a person that maybe people watching this or listening to this think, I must go and check out his podcast. He's a fucking good interviewer, really good. I'm sure there are better, and I'm sure one of the reasons he's great is because he's so well known and has such a presence and command that people are not going to want to fuck it up. They're going to want to interact with him because he has a good platform. I've stopped listening to his podcast because I've got bored with his particular tone of voice, but he's really good. And that was a surprise to me because I'm like, well, he's arguably a good actor and clearly an intelligent person, but man, he knows how to ask a question and he's smart.
And how do you ask your question? What's the best way?
Well, for me, it's about just having a conversation. Yeah. So
I think that's the great thing about podcasts. It becomes a conversation where you just go back and forth, even what's happening right now. You know what I'm saying? It's let's talk about it. Whereas there's strict interviews, which I try and steer away from.
So you've asked me quite a few questions, and I feel like you've asked me none, which is great.
Yeah, which I think is the goal. Yeah,
totally. And to go back to this 10-minute phoner thing, so that teaches you good skills around how to really get these questions in, but you always walk away going, damn, I wish I'd asked them this, or why did I say that like that?
And you probably don't feel connected with the other person.
Of course
as well,
you don't,
because you're just like, hey,
and they don't, and there's the barrier of the fact that it's a phone call. So I wanted to, I'm no pioneer. Podcasts were going for ages before I started one, but that was my motivation, was like, okay, let's show people I'm not an asshole. Let's show people that when I've got time to actually go through a subject with someone and not just write 300 words or speak to someone for 10 minutes, we can have a really good conversation. It can go in all directions. And, it gives you that time to go, well, I've got time to ask them that. If I had an hour and a half with the bass player from Led Zeppelin, I'd ask him about the obscure dance music projects he made in the 90s, but I'm not going to do that when I've got 10 minutes because, but sometimes when you hit on something like that with someone, someone told me ages ago, which I liked, that to get a really good interview out of someone, you already have to know everything about them. And I almost think that's true. Some days I think that's exactly it with arts, entertainment, journalism. You kind of got to prove that you know stuff because then you get them on board. But podcasts are changing that, and we're getting people to show their vulnerable side. We're getting people to, talk around the subject, not just answer the bullet points. And my thing with questions is, with podcasts now, I go into them with none, pretty much.
Well, I've written like a bunch of questions and I actually haven't even hit any of them yet. And that's kind of what I'm trying to get to a stage where it's just like, hey, and let the conversation
have
flow.
the backup, absolutely.
Yeah, have the backup.
Yeah.
And I've definitely had like maybe one or two guests where I feel like I really need it, or there's guests like where there's some points that I'm really interested in getting into. But that mainly comes from a place of like being ignorant. Like I just don't really know much about the subject. So I want to come in. So for example, like I had this guy, Nathan Wallace, who's like a neuroscientist on the podcast. And I don't know jack shit about neuroscience. You know what I mean? So I'm not going to be like, hey man, so like the brain.
Yeah. You know what it is from a Wikipedia entry.
Exactly.
You just looked at.
But I think there's real merit in like approaching each conversation being like, listen man, I'm pretty fucking dumb. I don't really know what I'm talking about. Let's just, you educate me, and it kind of can relate to, the audience once again in the sense that like I don't really know much going into this topic, but let's just see what happens.
If your audience or your guest starts off by thinking you might be a little bit dumb, that's just so much better than them starting off thinking you might be quite smart.
You reckon?
I think so, because like you can only go
can only go up.
You can only go up versus going downhill, right? Like, I mean, sometimes I've felt with guests that I've talked to, some of them have felt more like an interview than a conversation.
Yeah,
and that's
absolutely.
for a variety of reasons too. Sometimes people have got an actual product to push.
Sure.
They've got their book out or their album, and they're in that cycle and they know that world and they want to hit their talking points. Other times, they're not very experienced at being interviewed.
Those are my favorite ones, though.
Totally. And
those are my favorite.
And you would find this too. I'm sure all podcasters find this. Podcasters of our level find this, is that sometimes you're talking to someone and it's the longest conversation about themselves they have ever and maybe will
100%.
ever have.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's frightening to some people and really exhilarating to others. Yeah. And the internet and podcasts have leveled that playing field where, why can't we have this conversation? We're not charging people. And if we are charging people, they get to decide whether they want to pay or not. So no one's getting ripped off here. If people feel like they've had enough of me now, they can click out of the screen, right? Or they can close off and find something else. And that's leveled the playing field. That's really great. Like, why can't we might hit on something. I'm already enjoying this conversation, but we might hit on something really profound. Yeah. In just a minute.
Not in this room.
No
bro.
pressure.
Just dumb stuff.
No pressure
here.
on you, but we might really get to. You know what I mean?
The pressure's on you, buddy. You're gonna have to bring that to the table.
Totally. And isn't that cool though? Like.
No, it's sweet. It's like, and I think this is another point too. Is like there's real merit, which is what I've started doing, is like chopping it up into clips, and then when you can get into those clips, you can really segment it, chuck it out. But I mean, with your podcast, you're audio only, right? But you also write up the blog about each episode.
Yeah.
And that's like gotten you quite a bit of reach.
Yeah, possibly.
That way as well.
Yeah, I mean, it made sense to me because I'm a writer, and it made sense to me because I have a website that was going before I had a podcast, and it made sense to me because, why not, basically. Yeah. Those are the reasons. And some weeks the blog thing is a little bit longer than others, but I try to keep it as a pretty tight little intro thing. And it's a way of just, having some links to some things if there are some contextual points. If the person's written 8 books and we talk about 3, you want to show that, hey, there's a lot of work here for you to look at. We only talked about 3 of their books. They've written 8. Here's the other 5.
So of course.
Or whatever. So there's that
Amazon affiliate link.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah. So there's all that stuff. I mean, I'm very, and you will know this already because we had a conversation about podcasts, and I've sort of outed myself as a slow adapter to technology. But
I'm also early though.
Well, in a way, but I'm not interested, to my own detriment, in making the clips. I'm not interested in having the video. I just want to have the conversation and record it, and I just want it to be there. And, if it's 3 hours long and someone gives me feedback, don't do another 3-hour long one. I'm probably going to put a 3-hour long one up the next week.
Right.
Maybe not. Maybe I'm not that much of a dick, but I might. I'm certainly I'm certainly going to hear that and understand that, and I'm not going to do 10 3-hour conversations, because 3 hours is Joe Rogan territory, and I don't think many people want that apart from his dedicated fan base.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. I think the longest podcast I've ever had is like an hour and a half. I can't really.
I think that's a really good amount.
I think so too. Like I find it like tough to carry it on, and these freaking seats are uncomfortable for that long too.
And I don't think that's a bad thing though.
No, neither do I.
You know, keep it business-like in a sense is quite cool. You know, this is a cool environment you've created for these podcasts because it's focused.
Yes,
we're here. We cannot avoid eye contact, but it's not intimidating. We've got things that we can scan the room for if we want to. There is space.
Dude, there's so many factors in like creating like a disarming environment. The studio's great itself, but like the laptop here, coffee there, it all contributes.
It's
to
good.
Like
you know, my thing was I wanted people to come into my home and see that.
How do you? Yeah, what do you think people coming into your home does to the conversations on your podcast?
Yeah, well,
disarming.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I've done plenty of ones where I've gone to people's houses, and I've done at least one on the side of the road in a car where two of us just sat in a car because we drove around Wellington. It was a guy from a band. Yeah. It's one of my favourite podcasts that I did. It's a guy from the band Jacob, amazing band, and you know, he got up early and his bandmates were sleeping, and he's like, well, we can't really do it in the hotel room. And I was like, yeah, my wife and child are sleeping. It's Sunday morning. Let's go for a drive, go somewhere nice. He's like, great idea. We drove round and round. It started to rain. We just pulled up by the beach and sat in my car, and I interviewed him, and he told me these incredible stories because they're a band from Napier that have a massive following in Europe. You know, it's a fascinating story anyway. And they opened for Tool, you know, and at Tool's request. And they're a fucking band from Napier, you know, and Tool chose them to open for them because they heard them and thought they were mind-blowing. So you're going to get a good conversation out of that guy no matter where it is. And I just like the fact that you can hear the rain on the roof of my car and we're just sitting chatting and I'm holding the recorder and we're in the front seats. I like that. But I would have got the same conversation out of him if he'd come to my house. I know that because of who he is.
Yeah.
But in terms of inviting people around, you know, my motivation, as I say, was, all right, you know, I was dealing with, you know, some pretty heavy hate mail at times. You know, I had people threatening to burn the house down and, you know, empty threats, I would guess. I would hope. The house is still standing. But, you know, when one guy wrote to me and said, because I didn't like a particular hip-hop show, he's like, you're lucky I don't burn your fucking house down. And I wrote back to him and said, I forward all this sort of correspondence on to the police, so thanks for that. And he wrote back and said, you know, fuck the police, I'll burn their station down too. So I clicked on his profile on Facebook, and under education, it only listed a kindergarten. You know, so I'm like, I'm out. Like, I'm not, there's no more back and forth. I just block, like, you know, and just block and hope for the best.
Were you getting a lot of hate?
Yeah, there was a fair bit at times. And
how do you deal with that?
Well, you know, probably in a lot of people's minds, it was not at all unwarranted.
Regardless, though, it would still have
I dealt
an
with
effect.
it from the point of view that they actually were hating what I said rather than me. And, you know, yeah, okay, I had my photo on a website, so they could totally hate me. And shit got personal, and that's fine. I just have no real issue with that. You know, when... you know, I guess the culmination, like the big thing, is Robbie Williams sends out a picture of me holding my child when he's 5 months old and says Simon Sweetman, baby eater, and sends it to his, 1.2 million or whatever it is, Twitter followers, because he didn't like the review I wrote of his gig. That has impact. And I was okay. I was okay with it. I was as okay with it, I think, as you could be. What I was not okay with was how upset my wife was about it. That upset me. But that was probably the culmination in terms of reach, in terms of hate mail. When you get someone of that magnitude, I don't wear it as any sort of badge of honour. It was an annoying thing.
Are you a believer in the idea all publicity is good publicity? Did that help increase?
You know, I don't
reach?
really think it did for me. Like, I guess I am, in theory, a believer in that concept. But I don't think it works for people in my position. Okay. You know, I think all publicity is good publicity to a degree. Well, I would argue too now, actually, you'd have to say that cancel culture, and I only use that term to very quickly describe it. I'm not for or against it. cancel culture would argue that not all good publicity is good publicity, wouldn't it? Now that would
absolutely.
be the answer there, and I don't think that's a bad thing, because I think accountability is one of the things that's very hard to come by on the internet, and maybe cancel culture is the start of that, and the Me Too stuff is the start of trying to put in some form of checks and balances in a largely, allegedly democratic and unchecked form. But I'm the bad guy in this situation because I'm the reviewer who didn't like a popular artist. So, I get hundreds of personal messages from people saying, good on you for saying Robbie Williams is shit. I was there and he was. It was fucking awful. I got messages from fans going, hey, I'm a huge fan, but I have to agree with you. But of course I get way more messages from people going, you're a piece of shit. You don't know anything. Your ears are painted on. Robbie Williams is a genius. Okay, even if he's not good, he's better than you. You're a fat cunt who can't sing. Whatever. So...
That was me.
Yeah. And
I wrote that one.
We worked it out. We're working it out. We're working it out. This, this coffee's not hot, so I can't throw it. Yeah, exactly. So all things were happening, but you're not going to win because you're in the position of you are the cartoon bad guy in that situation. And I guess I always knew that. I grew up, I didn't try to be like a savage reviewer, but I grew up reading music reviews, positive and negative, balanced and completely over the top, and I love them all, and I see the point of all of them because writing has to be entertaining, and so my review of Robbie Williams I think was really entertaining. I think it was, let me entertain you.
Well,
I thought it was good.
Got
a reaction,
right? Which is the huge
but
thing.
I also think it wasn't written out of spite beyond the fact that I did not like his performance. That's not spite. That's observation. And, anyway, that's the culmination of the hate mail thing, I think. And, but, people threatening to, if I see you at a gig, I'm going to step you out. If I see you down the street, my gang will get you, rah, rah, rah. And even, the absurdity of it to me was actually first put really prevalent when I went and reviewed Cliff Richard. Now, Cliff Richard is, a boomer staple, an old guy. And I'm no Cliff Richard fan, but I know his legacy. And I go to the show as a music reviewer, and he puts on a good show for his fans. There is no way you could say he was not good. And so I write that. It's arguably dispassionate. And the next day, I'm walking my kid in a pushchair. He's under 2, and I'm taking him for a stroll in the morning, and a complete stranger walks past me who obviously knows my photo from the internet and goes, ha, Simon Sweetman, what a loser. Didn't realise you're a Cliff Richard fan. And I said, were you at the show, mate? And he goes, nah, of course not. And I said, oh, well, you'd be better placed than me to say that it was good, right? And he sort of scratched his head and was like, you're a fucking dick. And it was kind of like, it was a fine interaction. I don't really care about it. But it was just like, you're not going to win against people that's their mindset. Here's a guy who was not at the show telling me that I had it wrong for being at the show and reporting on it. So you're the cartoon bad guy as the reviewer with a reputation. So you just got to roll with it.
People are dumb.
Well,
so dumb.
I would I would love to say, hey, what about the time I said this about your favorite act? But I'm not going to sit there and try and win
No, you don't
argument.
even try and rationalize with these people.
So you just move on.
I heard a funny story of my friend putting together a comedy show and then wanting you to come review it. Because it's like, I need to get Simon. Simon's never come to my show. And you came and you just tore it to shreds.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good. I think I know. I think I remembered that.
And then he invited you back the next year as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think he and I had some conversations around that even. So I sort of am amazed by that. Like, that's quite incredible.
Man, honestly,
that's what I meant. No, but that's great from
huge.
Yeah, and it's great from his point of view to actually go, hey, I asked you. You delivered. You said what you thought.
Very
That's on me.
adult response.
I sought you out, and I mean, stuff like that could be brutal. And the comedy world has been fascinating to me.
What's your thoughts on, let's say New Zealand comedy, and let's say by extension Wellington comedy?
Yeah, well, I'm only getting to really know the Wellington comedy thing now, probably through podcasts. Really, thinking there's some good people to talk to. I mean, I'm really interested to talk to you about comedy because I don't know your comedy. I know your comedy through your podcast. And
Yeah, it's very different.
And I can tell it's different, which is not to say you're not funny on your podcast.
Yeah,
Sometimes you are, but you're not trying to be.
No, it's definitely different. And I do feel like at times with like the podcast, if I wonder if I'm just trying to create like an image for myself that perhaps like, because when you do comedy, you can kind of, you're at the end of the day, you're looking for validation from the audience, but at the same time, like you can do it through like an absurdist kind of take on reality, which in itself doesn't really like, I don't know. It's probably just a bit of an ego clash that I'm having. Like the podcast is one thing and it's topics that I'm genuinely super interested in.
Yeah.
But then it's a clash in the sense that it's like my stand-up comedy is just like looking for the laughs. You know what I mean?
Also, it's fair to say, I think, that it's almost a cliche now to be the comedian with a podcast,
100%,
right? And
100%,
so you're going, how do I
yeah.
navigate that? Because Mark Maron, Joe Rogan are two of the biggest names in terms of across the last decade.
Sure.
They have been two of the biggest names, and there are Dax Shepard and Conan O'Brien and loads of others that have regular podcasts, but those two are the two that legitimized the idea of the comedian being able to think wider than just getting their jokes. And certainly in Mark Maron's case, it's really what made him. He was a middling comedian, and he was, if someone tweets out now that I said that, he would still react to that. He's got that much of a fragile ego, even though he can fucking interview Barack Obama and does an excellent job at it.
He's great.
He's a great interviewer.
Yeah.
And actually, I was listening to his most recent podcast last night when I was walking home. He was talking to Rick Glassman, who's a comedian, and one of them said, I think it was Maron said, I think it was something someone else told them, but they said, all comedians are really just looking for a way to control people laughing at them, which I thought was fantastic.
Ooh, wow.
It's like, if I'm going to get up and be a clown, I might as well be the person who directs the traffic.
That's a very interesting...
I thought it was cool.
Yeah, interesting point.
It's not necessarily 100% correct, but it's an interesting point.
Yes, a very interesting take. I would say on the whole, it's probably correct.
I reckon
Yeah,
I
definitely.
reckon it's one of those deep psyche things where it's like you can negate that all you want. You're actually just proving it.
Well, yeah. What do you think like the core ingredients for, what do you think is more important for an artist to truly get to a point of like fully being authentic and original and expressing themselves? Is it hard work or is it like ingrained creativity?
Yeah, I think it is hard work. I mean, I think a lot comes down to just the good old-fashioned undefinable X factor, right? Something works for you because it speaks to you. And that's the magic. And that happens in writing. It happens in music. Some of us have tools to describe the way a thing makes us feel. And some of us don't, so we go and look to others who do. But one of the best things that's ever happened to me as a reviewer is going, fuck, I do not know how to describe what I just experienced. That's so beautiful. And comedy is a tricky one because you're an instant punchline ruiner. I find reviewing comedy really interesting. I find talking about comedy interesting. I've never wanted to be a comedian. I don't have that skill. I can be funny. I know I can be. I can be funny in my writing. I can occasionally be funny in my podcasts. I can be funny in conversation. I do poetry, I do performance poetry, and I know I can be funny in both the writing and delivery of that. But none of that translates to me wanting to be a comedian. But separate to all of that, or at least separate in my life, it's probably informed some of my delivery, but I've been a total student of comedy. I've watched it. So what I'm really interested in with people like yourself, just thinking of your age, is, and I know I interviewed Lucy, who's a friend of yours, who's a comedian who has been on your podcast too. So I was interested in talking to her about this. There is a generation of people, you don't necessarily care about the icons of comedy the way me and my generation, the older generation, felt we had to. And I hate doing these generational lectures, but I feel like that's an amazing thing that has stopped since Generation X. I think, Generation X, we were sort of felt, we've been made to feel like whatever the boomers and the war babies did is a pedestal that we need to reach. And anyone younger than me has come in and gone, sort of people that grew up firsthand with the internet have gone, fuck it, I don't care. I don't care if Richard Pryor's allegedly the most, the classic stand-up comedian, or Dave Chappelle is. That dude that made a funny YouTube video that's got millions of subscribers that I've watched on a loop on my phone is funny. And I'm going to go on stage and do my version of that. And I'm amazed at that. I think that's awesome and so freeing, but I'm fascinated by it.
I think it's because of how just the churn rate that we see, you know, and like how much of it that's actually out there and how accessible comedy actually is, and just any form of like persona, you know, like, so you go on to, for example, with old school comedy in the 80s and 90s, you'd probably see it on TV and that's it.
Yeah, totally.
Whereas now I can type in comedian and get access to a million different comedians like that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it's more or less us choosing who we want to be interested in, rather than like this organization saying, "Hey, this is the next."
This is the hierarchy.
That still exists. Don't get me wrong.
I know it does at a performing level, of course.
100%. What the great thing I think about what, you know, technology, social media, and everything has done is it's really just given everybody the opportunity to like kind of express themselves and quote unquote make it. You know what I mean?
Totally.
But at the same time, there's a lot of exploitation that goes along, like, you know, Spotify, like we mentioned before, not paying its artists and stuff like that.
YouTube having particular parameters. Yeah.
Exactly. But
quite unobtainable ones for most of us.
Yeah, absolutely. But at the same time, like, we still have that avenue. Things are still significantly better. Before it was just like get a spot on TV, you know, or and that was your only avenue. Like,
yeah, I guess the thing that sticks with me about this stuff is like, you know, I put my poems up on YouTube and I'm just doing that for myself. You know, I have something like 15 subscribers, so I'm not, you know, if it suddenly becomes 30 or 100, I'll probably be slightly pleased. If it drops down to 5, I won't stop the channel, you know. So it's just happening no matter what. It's for me. And I'm putting them there and I can send them to people if they want to see them, and whatever, people can discover them. But my son, who's 9, who's growing up with YouTube, says to me, you should do a funny video and then people will watch your poems more. And I find that deplorable. Yeah. You know, the artist in me or whatever, or the serious person in me goes, you know, I don't want to trip over the cat and have thousands of people watch that on a loop. Yeah. Not because it embarrasses me that I did it, but it's embarrassing that would be the gateway to a poem I wrote. Whereas I know people are quite happy with that, and people go, that's what I'll do. But I'm also fine for someone else to do that. That's just not for me.
I get it. It's maintaining
some sort of artistic integrity is happening with me.
Which I totally get.
And I'm not saying it's not for anyone else. But that's my version of it. That's how I understand it.
I do think there's a balance between like artists trying to survive though and make it. You know, we all make compromises. If you want to be a full-time...
Go back to that thing you said about the constant stream we have to
it's like...
So people can compartmentalize it and go, I didn't want to make the tripping over the cat video, but I did it because it's getting me to here. Yeah. Now, I admire, if that's the plan and it is that structured, there is that level of, you know, connection and thought. I admire that. I don't have that. I don't go, this is going to get me to there. I don't have that in me.
Yeah, what motivates you?
What motivates me is a good question. I've been thinking about that a lot over the last wee while, and I'm not sure I can answer it with the certainty that I used to. But I enjoy putting my voice out into the world, not because I think I'm any sort of authority, just because it helps me sort of reaffirm the things I'm interested in, what I know, and it's sort of helping me get to know myself. I'm noticing myself changing through doing this stuff. To go back to answer your earlier question about New Zealand comedy and the Wellington scene, you know, that's interesting for me because I sort of missed the major development in it, because I was reviewing comedy for the newspaper in a situation where you would basically just review the international acts. So the big names would come, you know, Ben Elton, I'm trying to think who else. Oh, you know, Bill Bailey, people like that. Lots of Danny Boy, people like that would come and do their shows, and they would get reviewed, and the local acts would not. And they might suffer, unfortunately, in getting 5 minutes opening, and that might be where they got mentioned. And so they might get absolutely ripped on. They might get 5 minutes at the top of a gig, and someone like me might say that 5 minutes was shit, and that's their only column inch they get, which sucks. So a bunch of comedians started pushing the newspaper around, hey, you need to review local acts, you need to do this, rah, rah. And this was 15 years ago. And so, yes, there was a semi-robust local comedy scene then, but not like there is now. And I moved away, got moved away and moved away. Like, it didn't bother me to not review comedy. I liked doing it, but I wasn't going to be a person who tried to review comedy, and I wasn't going to go and integrate myself in the local scene. And I knew that wouldn't work, because you start to meet people, and when you meet people, it becomes much harder to be honest about them. I've always wanted that little bit of distance. I do know lots of musicians, and I'm friends with some musicians that are well known and have made great music. And in a lot of cases, I stop reviewing them, or I'll review them because I really like them, and always have, and I feel okay about that. But I don't suddenly want to start reviewing someone because I met them at a barbecue and start giving them good reviews, because I know someone's going to, I know in myself that's not right, and I know someone's going to see through that. So that distance is important, and it's hard to achieve without looking like a bit of a jerk. So again, enter the podcast. You can have a conversation with someone. So you can have a conversation with someone that is not a review. So I might never review your comedy. I'm very interested in coming and seeing you do some comedy at some point for sure, because we now know each other. And so I want to see what that looks like and how that sounds. But doesn't mean I'm going to review you. But we're having this interaction, and really, hopefully, this is more meaningful than just a few lines on my website, which is all it would be now, because so I guess that's a long way of saying I missed the major development in both the New Zealand and Wellington comedy scene. Back in about 2005 or 6, there was still like letters getting sent to the paper and notices on venues saying, from fairly established comedians saying Simon Sweetman is not welcome to review this show. You can send anyone else. So the paper would sometimes not send anyone, or maybe they sent someone. I don't always know, but I do know that I would go to venues to go and see something else, and a couple of times I saw a sign up with my name saying you're not allowed to be here.
Do you think you were being unfair in your judgments, or do you think? Because from a comedian's perspective, I think I would want an honest opinion on my comedy, but I wouldn't want somebody there who I don't think is going to give an honest opinion, or somebody who, and this is probably, but at the same time, you're probably approaching it not necessarily as a critic of comedy, but more just as an everyday person watching someone else's comedy, which therefore you should be a reflection of everybody else. This
is a really tricky, interesting question, I think. It might not be interesting for people listening, but this is the great philosophical dilemma of what subjectivity is. I can be subjective and give my opinion. And I can tell you until I'm blue in the face that I know heaps about comedy. I love comedy, but I'm not a comedian, so I'm just a punter.
But you shouldn't be reviewing it from the perspective of a comedian.
No, that's right. And I shouldn't need to list all of that stuff. So listing that stuff doesn't help. But not listing that stuff also doesn't help. It's weird. Who are you and why? We should get. I've heard it all. We should get comedians to review comedians. That
silly.
Does not work.
No,
silly.
Because it's like the joke structure was great. No one laughed, but the joke structure was great. It's like you really should be getting who's your audience? If your audience is comedians, then get a comedian to review it for sure.
Yeah, I mean it's funny. Like I haven't reviewed comedy for a long time. The last time I did anything about a comedian that I can remember. I mean, I'll review the odd comedy special on my website and comedy albums because I'm interested in that stuff. But local stuff, I guess, there's been a lockdown as well. And so I've been to a couple of shows since, but nothing that I've thought about reviewing. I went and saw Lucy perform because I knew I was going to talk to her for the podcast. Yeah. So again, I don't want to write about that. I just wanted to observe that because I knew who she was and I'd seen some YouTube clips. But might as well go and see her in the flesh before I actually talk to her. So I did that. And I'll always do that sort of thing. But a couple of years ago, I saw Nora Jones perform, and the musician, and her opening act was Melanie Bracewell, which I thought was a very odd thing to have happen, but whatever. And I did not find her funny. And so I wrote a couple of lines at the end of the review that basically said, why did this happen? I didn't think she was very good. Now, I know she's a comedian of some notability in New Zealand. She does all sorts of things. And then not much after that, I was at a charity show performing, and so was she. And I think
what were you performing? Poetry?
I was doing poetry. Yeah. It was at the start of last year for the Australian bushfires.
Yeah.
And so I was doing some poetry for it, and it was a variety show thing. Musicians, poets, blah blah blah, comedians, and she was in town, so she was on the bill. And Corey Gonzalez McCure, who just introduced himself to me. I don't think we'd met, but he delighted in taking me over to introduce me to her. And he said, "Oh, this is Simon Sweetman who wrote that shit review about you." And she was gutted, and I could see it in her face. She was absolutely crestfallen, and she couldn't speak. And I took no pleasure in that. That's the reason I'm telling you that. This is not a trophy. This is not me going, yeah, I got her, pinned her to the wall. but at the same time, I don't regret saying what I said because I did not find her funny. And I don't think that makes me like a borderline personality case. I think that's just someone who knows what their role is. So I don't like making people feel uncomfortable when I meet them, but I'm aware that it can happen because of things I've done. So I didn't want to seek out any conversation with her because she did not want that to happen. So I'm going to leave her the fuck alone. I'm not going to try and win her over and go, hey, you know what? You're actually pretty funny. I just got it wrong. I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to move away, which is what I did. And that sort of thing has happened. Corey was being the stirrer there, and I don't mind that he was being the stirrer. That was what he wanted to do. So I'm not really throwing him under the bus either. It's just a thing that happened. And those sorts of stories have happened. And that's why reviewing comedy is quite tricky. You meet someone, and you might like them as a person, and then not like their act. David Cormack was involved in comedy years ago, and now he's not. And I've had him on my podcast as a guest. He's a PR guy now, and he's a very opinionated guy in general, and I like David. And I never saw his comedy, but I don't think I would have liked his comedy. And he certainly didn't like my comedy reviewing. But he messaged me and said, let's have a beer. I need to work you out. And we sat and had a beer and had a chat about comedy. And I like to think we're friends. We don't hang out lots, but we stop and see each other in the street and talk, and we follow what each other's up to. And I had a great podcast with him. But we just have completely different ideas about what works with comedy.
It's a weird place as a reviewer, right? Because your role, I don't really know, is your role really just to give your own opinion? Is that the end goal of the reviewer, or is it to
no, it's not.
Act as a beacon for the rest of society?
Yeah, it's somehow both of those things and neither of those things. Yeah, again, this is the weird philosophical undoing of subjectivity, isn't it? I think that when you're reviewing a gig, you have two jobs. Well, three jobs, I guess. You have two jobs. You're putting across your opinion, and you're also cataloguing. You're putting something down for the public record, something that happened in Wellington on the 25th of January in 1998. This happened, or whatever. I go back and write about some of my favourite gigs I've ever seen. And just the other day, I was talking about writing a piece about seeing Emmylou Harris in 2001. And so, when I wrote about Emmylou Harris in 2001, that's a record of what happened in Wellington on that day. So it kind of becomes an archival news story. But it's totally driven by my opinion of whether I thought that was a good show or not. And that's driven by what I saw happen in the audience and how it went down, but also what I think of that person and what I measure her against as both all of her other work that I know and all of the other performances that I've seen. So how do you distill that all down into 300 or 400 words? You're going to get it right sometimes and you're going to get it wrong sometimes. And so there is no real answer beyond those are the things that I think I'm trying to do when I do that stuff. And I love the challenge of it. And sometimes you're doing it in 10 minutes, as I say, at the end of the night. And that's exhilarating. And it always was. I love that. And sometimes I used to get sent up to the Dominion Post newsroom and type the review out live on the computer there for someone to literally just go, right, we don't even have time to edit that. That looks like it's good. I can't see anything underlined. Grab, paste, that's going in. And it's total publish will be damned. The next day there's typos in it. And you're like, well, whose fault was that? Was that my fault? Was that the sub-editor's fault? It was both of our fault. It was both of our fault. And or little gremlins happen in the typing. Or some sub-editor gives it a really shit headline because you don't come up with the headline. And then everyone talks about how, that Sweetman said this. And did you read the headline? This is what he had the fucking balls to say. And I didn't even write the headline.
Right.
But you have to go with that.
That's a classic
you drive
thing
yourself
that happens.
crazy trying to explain that stuff to people, wouldn't you? Every time. Hey, look, I stand by what I said, but by the way, that headline's not mine. But people don't know that. People don't know that.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be in your role, quite frankly.
Well, the role doesn't exist now.
Is it gone?
Really, it's gone. It's totally gone. I mean, you look at stuff, and when 660 plays, you get reviews that mention the ticket sales, the alcohol consumption. They run as a promo for the promoter.
Right.
They run as an advertisement for the good idea of being at that show. And they're basically a puff piece for the band. And unless something spectacularly awful happens, like a set malfunction, you're not going to hear about it. Because they're sending along young reporters who aren't music focused, who aren't savvy about what's happening in entertainment, and haven't got runs on the board following, and I'm careful to, I'm not trying to say this as a bitter person who used to do it. I'm not auditioning for a role that doesn't exist. I'm just analysing how I see it now. They aren't really reviews, and people don't want reviews because people can go online and write their own ones and read other people's that aren't getting paid for it. So the idea is, oh, you weren't getting paid for it, so you must really love it. So actually, in a way, that's more authentic. It's funny, like, look, let's be honest. I only ever made $75 writing a gig review. It wasn't, I always had a full-time job on top of it. It wasn't, a lot of people had this idea that I was, the real stink thing about that guy is he shits on everyone and he makes money doing it. I mean, sometimes it wouldn't cover the expenses of getting there. Like sometimes you go to a gig and go underground parking and come out with a $30 or $40 parking bill and then wait 2 months to get $75 put in your account. And if you buy a couple of beers, whatever, you're out of pocket to go and,
I'm going to call this podcast The Real Simon Sweetman because you're going exposed right now.
Well, there's nothing, there's no secrets around any of this.
Sure,
it's, I wrote a book last year of poems and called it The Death of Music Journalism. I'm trying to own the fact that the role doesn't exist, and I guess I'm trying to navigate, well, what do I do now? Like, because for years, even though I was a bookseller and I was, a nanny and I was a stay-at-home dad and I worked in an office and I wrote news summaries, I was always in people's minds, and including my own, I was a music journalist, and I'm not. It's still in me, and I still go and talk on RNZ, so I guess on those days I'm a music journalist. But, I'm not like I was because the role's not there like it used to be. And I'm wanting to own that and explore, well, what do I do now? And maybe I will try comedy.
Hey, we're going to love it. They'll love you.
What got you into doing comedy?
I've always been funny. I think when I was younger, it was used as like a way of trying to just make friends, But strictly stand-up comedy. Me and my buddy went to a Raw Meat Monday, which is just on Blair Street, open mic, and it was horrible. And he was like, "You can do this. Yeah. You can absolutely do this." And I was like, "You reckon I should do it? Should I do it?" Couldn't. I signed up. It went well, man. It went really well. Yeah. First, it's weird because like I think there's not like I think everyone says their first time they were shit. That wasn't really the case. I wasn't great, but I was funny and I got laughs and I brought a bunch of my friends, so I had packed the room essentially. But it went well, and I did it a second time and it went well again, and I did it a third time and I just ate shit like so bad.
What's that like?
It was awful. Yeah. It was so shocking. Like I'm on stage and I'm just like, no one's laughing. Oh God! And it was like an empty room, Cavern Club in the basement. Yeah. And I get up there, and I'm like, okay, my jokes aren't working. No one's laughing. And then halfway through, I just fumbled, and I went, guys, fuck this and fuck you. And I walked off stage. That was it. Wow. Yeah. I did 3 minutes, and the host was like, oh, no. Paul Douglas. Do you know Paul Douglas?
No, I know the name, but no.
Great guy. Right. And he was emceeing, and it was great because he saw me like 2 years later, and then I like significantly improved.
What did it, when I'm asking you this, I'm not asking you this with, like fucking...
No, go ahead, man.
I'm going to go home and save it for the wank bank. I'm not getting off on this at all. But what was it like in the moments after failing? Like, how did you process that and get over that?
I had to sit back down in the audience after telling them all to fuck themselves.
Jeez.
You sit down and you feel really raw. But it's almost like after you have, for me at least, I can only speak from my own experience, when you cry, when you have a big cry and you're like, but afterwards you feel refreshed.
Yeah, cathartic.
Yeah. And so I went up on stage, ate shit, but I was so disappointed in my performance and so disappointed in that I'd walked off stage. Yeah. I kind of came back at it going forward with like a bit more aggression and just be like, all right, gotta get better, gotta get better. But it was good. And I think bombing like that, it's a classic phrase, you learn so much more from bombing than you do from anything else.
Well, it's true in other disciplines. I think like in music, it's really important to have shitty gigs.
Sure. Failure is huge.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I got a lot out of it. It's weird. As I've done more and more comedy, I've been doing it for like 2.5 years now, and I've, I want to be able to get up every night of the week. You just can't in Wilmington because the scene's too small.
Yeah. But shit, man. When I was reviewing it, you could only get up every month.
I know.
You're already,
I know.
you know, like the platform has improved to such a level that you will, because 2.5 years is pretty fresh still, right?
Very,
like,
in the comedy scene, for
that's
sure.
What I mean.
Well, when you think about it, too, you compress all the time that you're actually up on stage. That's really only like an hour, 2 hours.
Yeah, a couple of hours. Yeah,
exactly. Because you're doing like 7 minutes. And you're doing the same jokes again and again.
Yeah.
Exactly. But I think in Wellington, like the scene, we used to have VKs. Remember VKs?
Yeah.
That closed, unfortunately, and that was going to act as our comedy club. I never went, dude.
Oh, it was
this
great.
was before my time.
I only went a couple of times, maybe 3 or 4. I really liked it, but it had, the writing was on the wall. You just knew going up there, oh, this place is great. I just don't think it's going to survive. And it didn't. You know?
What do you think it was that?
Oh, I just think it's a hard sell. I mean, you know, like God, you know, and the other thing is, you know, the horrible thing with venues in New Zealand is, and I know it happens elsewhere, but my experience is in New Zealand, you have to sell alcohol to function. And when you're doing open mics, comedy, experimental music, anything fringe, 90% of your crowd are there to buy one drink or a coffee,
or they're broke,
or water,
mm-hmm.
and their argument, if they need one, is that they're there to support the act. And maybe they paid the cover charge, but quite often they're on the door one way or another as well. So you just got to look at the takings and go, this is a fucking failure. This is just not going to survive.
It's tough.
It's tough. So you don't go, ha, bummed out. You go, shit, that's tragic. Like, it's awful, but that's just the reality. I mean, I've been in those spaces, you know. I've been and played as a musician in bands in bars and attracted a crowd of nearly no one. And gone, this is on us tonight, totally. But also, this venue won't be here for long, and it's been closed within a month. And then I've been, you know, sometimes you go back and it's thriving because someone really good is playing, you know. So
slap in the face.
Well, whatever, a little bit. But also, you know, be realistic. I've never played in a really great band. I'm an okay musician. I'm no great musician. I can play. I can get through the gig. I play the drums, so I can always make it work. There are far better drummers than me. But on the night performing, I'm going to do enough to justify being there. But I played in covers bands that were either, you know, paid before the gig and it didn't matter who was there, or I've been playing in weird little experimental things where you know, if you get 5 or 10 people along, you're stoked.
Yeah.
So I'm not using it as that sort of barometer, but I just know. And then obviously as a reviewer and as a fan of these things, I've been in every kind of show and every kind of crowd you can imagine, and I've worked the door in venues, you know, helping out mates, and I've done performance, you know, I've had 2 sort of cracks at poetry in a way, because I sort of earnestly attempted performance poetry in my 20s, and I got a few spots opening for bands, and I did open mics, and I did a couple of my own shows, and I even did some completely improvised spoken word with a band, and all of that stuff was terrifying and really good for me. But I'm really glad I sort of knocked it on the head. I think the reviewing thing happened and life happened. I got a job and I lost my passion. I didn't really quite believe a lot of the stuff I was saying. It was more, I didn't really have my voice down, I reckon. And so then I've come back to performing poetry, as I've always kept writing it, but I've come back to performing poetry now in the last 2 or 3 years with a real purpose. I like the stuff that I'm doing. I think it works. And I'm very confident about getting up and performing them. But because I'd had 15 years of not doing it, man, I fucking died on stage again when I started going to open mics. And I loved it. It was awful but exhilarating. It's really important. And standing there and reading poems that you know the audience is cringing because they can't handle what you're saying. You don't get off on it, but it's important that it happens. Yeah, all of those experiences are important. I'm fascinated in that with comedians, because, you know, some comedians I've talked to, they bombed the first time. So you basically go, and I'm sure anyone listening
ultimate failure, and you improve.
You just go, why did you fucking do it again?
Yeah.
And so I instantly like hearing the idea that the person did.
Yeah.
I want to, you know, whether you're good or not is irrelevant. Shit, you've got some, even if it's a little bit of stupidity and a little, you know, a little bit of
desperation
delusion,
for validation.
Desperation and delusion. There's some stickability about you that you've got up and done it again, and I'm amazed by that. Yeah. But it must have been awful to hit it out of the park in a relative sense a couple of
jarring.
times.
And it was just so jarring.
Fucking
my friend came and I just sat down with him in the audience. This is when my friend still came to my stand-up. Now no more. Jeez. Hey, Simon, now I know we want to do like a joint podcast thing, but I got to start wrapping this up. I just realized. Is there anything you really wanted to ask me?
Well, I sort of wanted to ask you around. I mean, what we might do is you might have to come and do
I feel like maybe
podcast.
we should actually do that. Yeah,
I agree.
Because I don't know if we.
It.
Yeah, no, this has been great. No, I've really enjoyed this. But
it's good.
But I think as far as collab goes,
definitely. I agree. I'm kind of curious, and you started to talk about your voice as a comedian versus as a podcaster.
Yeah.
So we haven't really figured out why you wanted to get into doing the podcasting entirely.
Why don't we talk about that on your podcast?
Yeah, okay.
I think that would be good. I think
fair.
we should do that because
right.
then we can go deep into that.
Yeah. No, that's fair. That was a stink last question for a 10-minute phone.
I know.
If this was a phone call, I would have got off. I would have got off and gone.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. Those 10-minute phoners are
teach you how to just go. Bah.
They are like they can be like when you bomb on stage. You get off the phone and go, holy fuck.
Yeah.
And my favourite story about that is actually a friend of mine. She interviewed Ben Harper, and she said she wasn't really that into him or music journalism, but she was an experienced reporter, and it was just a job. And she was talking to him, and she said he was an asshole. And when you say that, other people will have had great experiences with him. It's just the moment that you get these people in. And so she said she was struggling, and then she said to him at the end, towards the end of 10 minutes, crawling along about the 7-minute mark, she says, can you describe your your relationship with New Zealand, because you come here a lot, and he said, my relationship with New Zealand is too special to describe. And she's going, oh fuck, and then he said, he goes, let's just have one more question. And she said some generic question about your new album.
Right, yeah.
And he said in third person, you had one final question with Ben Harper, and that's what you asked. And so she's like, I just slammed the phone down. That was, all I could do was go, fuck you, dude. Now there are so many stories like that. Now that's not to paint him as an asshole.
Sure.
He was an asshole in that moment.
Sure. Yeah. People aren't in uniform at all. That's pretty badass, though.
Yeah. And we've all got stories like that. And it is the equivalent of a comedian bombing on stage, I think.
I bet.
Yeah. You feel shit, and then you learn from it.
Yeah, jeez. By the way, Simon Sweetman, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah,
thank you, sir. Hey, if you enjoyed that, make sure you hit that subscribe button on the left-hand side. And to watch other episodes, click one of those squares on the right. If you only want to listen to this and don't have time to watch the full video, you can find this podcast wherever podcasts are listened to online. Thanks. Bye.